the leading participation sport in this country today in terms of number of units sold and amount of money spent. There are a great many adults who have taken up bicycling. Jogging is out, in case you're not a physical culturist. And bicycling is in, definitely in. And if you have to drive on some of these back country roads in the summertime, you know darn well that bicycling is in, because every curve you go around, there are two or three of them right in front of you. And I think it's a darn good idea. And I think it would serve two purposes. First, it would develop the interest in, actually it would serve three. Develop the interest in local history. It would encourage more people to take up this form of exercise and get out and get some fresh air. And I think that it will also get other people doing things like this. And if you can do this, you've done a lot more than the Association of American Wheelmen, it's a bicycle organization. Well, they're fighting all over the country to get these bicycle things established. And everybody is, local government particularly, is kind of poo-pooing the whole idea. They give a lot of lip service to it, and then frankly forget all about it. But bicycling is becoming quite a thing. In Albany, it's amazing the number of people who ride bicycles back and forth to work, and Steve's been a chance to this. Yeah, we now have bicycle routes after some wrangling with the local government. But people are using this form of transportation not only as a form of recreation or exercise, but also as transportation. I know people who have given up using the car, when they only have a short distance within the city to go from place to place. They're using bicycles now. And I've even seen them out when it's snowing, and the roads are terrible. Some people really get wrapped up in it. But, you mentioned freewheeling. That's becoming a big thing in Florida, for example. In these retirement parks, trailer parks, condominiums, and this sort of thing, that's all you see, a three-wheeled bicycle. And these people ride all over on them. And these are retired people over 65 years of age, are riding around on three-wheeled bicycles. They do their shopping this way. They go to the post office this way. Many of them can't afford to own and operate a motor vehicle. And a lot of them just can't drive a car anymore. It's too physically demanding for them. Yeah. So we're two areas or two things that people are interested in for leisure time activities can be joined together: bicycling and local history. And I think they're natural. And too many historical societies would get upset the minute you mention bicycling in connection with local history, because they can't think in these terms. For them, local history is to hear a lecture on the genealogy of a certain family, or to hear a lecture on the archaic Indians of the region, or something of this nature. But that isn't what the whole thing is. We're talking about something much, much larger. Not only about local history, but about people. And that's what you have to be concerned with, are the people in your community. Now, I don't want to keep talking because I get in the habit of repeating things. So, I'd like to hear your questions or even your suggestions. And Steve and I would be happy to try to give you answers or suggestions or comments on these things.
You want to take the statement that owns will take the sign back. Are you familiar years ago, for the red stuff, did they actually look at the deeds, the road bonds, and homestead books?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're public records. Sometimes they give you some status, but it depends on the local, like town clerk or county clerk or whatever. But generally, in this state, they're pretty good about it.
They have to allow you to make an arrangement between.
Right. Most of the complaints we get are people who simply walk into an office and want to see something right then and there. And when they're told they can't, then they complain to us or to some other governmental agency, or state agency, and raise a big fuss about it. But if you call up ahead of time or stop in ahead of time and let them know what you want, and find out when they could do it for you, because these people are busy.
Anyone here had contact with the county? The county clerk on
You can go there. You even have copying machines there. You can copy maps and.
By the way, this is Mrs. Johnson, who's the historian for the grave. That's a big new one.
When you get your license plate, it's one there. You're also copied by hand with the people.
In some places, why they take Also, if you're interested in maps, apparently the Indian Library has a very good
Collection of maps.
maps. Some of the president of the Indian Library is really good at it. You can tell I know this degree. But he lives around this area, and he would be most cooperative. And I talked to him on the phone the other day, and he was saying that the person, woman who's in charge of this thing, that she's a patient, and can't see. But she is very willing to help. So if you're interested in that, this is another area where you can make it on.
I hope you have some original maps. I already have them. I just want to get permission that I can give them to the Historical Society. Well, there's 2 boxes of them that you will delegate. And these are original copies about 1829 or earlier of the 9 partners grant. Yeah, and what I've done, we've made a list of all the books she gave the library for tax purposes. And I'm going to put a covering letter in. She just didn't want to throw them out of collection. And I took them and went through them. And I'm going to ask her, but you weren't in existence. You weren't in existence at that time. So, and I'm sure it's going to be a guess. I'm going to write the news. And I'll bring it in and we'll have our own original maps to start with.
That's great. We also have our own from, this is the tunnel. 2 atlases at this time. The 1867 years atlas and another atlas of 1876. Which has atlas of every town in the county, including Philly. And I think this is a convention. But this is the one. So yeah, this has the railroad. The one from 18. I think about it's up on the Millbrook is a railroad town. When you were talking about railroad, that's an empty railroad now. Although you can't walk down and see where it was. The 1867 map doesn't have a railroad, and and there's no Millbrook. There's one to the four corners, and there's Arch Village. There's nothing in between. The 1867 map, which is this one, has the railroad, and there is a Millbrook. The graphic, it's only 9 years difference, but what happened after the Twin Railroad came in? This is a copy of the 1876 one, but it's just as, you know, you can see this is Xerox. I hope to get some better Xeroxes or photographs and used by the inventory committee, but one of my ideas for fundraising, another town did this, was to get some actually good size copies made on good quality paper and sell them. And other towns sold them for $1 a piece. They cost, I think, $1 a piece, $25 a piece. So that would be, I think that'd be great. Yeah. Give me available. And they're very nice, very, I mean, the frames and whatnot. Oh, this is another.
Let me just say something about your question. The kind of question that she asked is the kind of thing that the Historical Society could be answering for people. In other words, as a group of people who are interested in this kind of thing, you could find out, like, what are the public records? Where are they? What kind of restrictions are on their use? And how they can be used. And this is the kind of information that you could... There are hundreds of people around, thousands of people around, who would very much like to start working on their family genealogy. But they haven't the faintest idea how to go about it. And they don't want to get involved with a professional genealogist. I mean, to them it would just be the kind of thing that they'd like to do themselves when they had a chance to do it, but they don't know where to start or how to go about it. Historical societies can, several historical societies I know of have classes in genealogy. How to do it, where to find information. This is the kind of thing that would draw out a great many people. Other people who wouldn't care about it.
There was a meeting the other night with a number of people here went to, it's on that landmark over the farm homestead. There was a slide lecture on Dutchess County local landmark. It was very interesting. The room was packed, literally packed with students from all over there. But the people who were interested in the history of architecture in this town.
This would be very interesting for the children to
Yeah.
know architecture, and when they're bike riding, to realize that this particular window is, begin to notice that there's a difference.
This is becoming very, very popular. There's always been an interest in the architecture of, let's say, palatial homes. The Vanderbilt mansion is well, I was going to say a good example, but I'd rather say a social example. But because I believe that this is not the kind of thing that we should be spending all of our energies and money on preserving, because it doesn't tell anything about the life of the common man. And nobody's considered, until recently, working to preserve these tangible parts of his life. Nobody cared about railroad architecture, for example, until a few years ago. And now it's too late. In a great many instances, the railroad structures are gone. The tracks are torn up. They don't know. All we're left with is Amtrak.
This is one of the questions on here.
A typical backwards, very poor school. Students were underachievers. Education was the kind of thing that nobody had much interest in. And this teacher decided that he tried to do something with these youngsters to involve them in the community, but also to preserve their heritage, which was really, which in the southern mountain country is very, very important to these people. And yet it, even though it is important, it's dying out like it would have died out in the rest of the country if people hadn't started taking the interest. So we turned these youngsters loose with cameras and tape recorders and notebooks on the community. And what came out of it was Foxfire. And it's one of the most fantastic collections of folklore and local history that I've ever seen. And if you can borrow or buy a copy of the Foxfire book, I think you'll find it really is well worthwhile. Maybe not in terms of the information that's contained in there, because you might not personally want to know how to build 10 different kinds of log cabins, which it tells you in there, with diagrams, photographs, and everything else. But I think it's a good example of what can be done with a little enthusiasm, and it really is a fantastic job. There are log cabin recipes, and there are anecdotes in there. One that is written in the dialect of the old woman who told it, and it was just sort of a rambling story about when she was a girl. And it's really fascinating, and it's almost poetical. And it's the kind of thing that would have died in a couple of years, because when she died, it was gone. And these youngsters have gotten it down. And this is the kind of thing that can be done, and it's being done over and over again. Foxfire has spawned a great many, I won't say imitators, because they're not imitators, but they're simply similar projects in different areas. And the kind of thing that could be done here. You may not get the log cabin variety of material, but there's certainly a great deal of cold remedies, this kind of thing.
Mother Earth News.
Mother Earth News, yeah.
What is what they did down in Unionville? They had a teacher who was living at the time of Lost City Village, which was a sacred school, and it was gone now. He spent one evening telling me about how they lived and what the farmers did and creative things that happened.
Yeah,
Just the whole evening was spent on that. Mother was a teacher who wasn't even a qualified teacher, who was taught to teaching some children who couldn't control them and how she taught theirs as well as teachers. But a lot of local things, for instance, ice making, of course that's out now, how the runs were and where it went in the village and all sorts of things.
Yeah, these things, I think, to me, Steve will disagree with me privately, because he's a full-fledged historian and researcher, but I'm convinced that folk history is more significant now to the average person than what we normally refer to as history. You disagree with me in public now, huh? But how many people now, especially younger people, know anything about ice? Ice to them is something that pops out of a little machine in the freezer compartment of the refrigerator. Or if they're not too well off, they have to put water in a tray and put it in there. But now they've got refrigerators, you don't even have to open the door. You put a glass under the thing and the crushed ice squirts out into the glass. They don't know anything about the work that was involved, the numbers of men and horses and ice houses and sawdust. And almost any one of these things you can go off in all kinds of directions, because with ice you had to have sawdust. Or that brings in sawmills and timber, and you can go on from there. Horses. Almost anything. You think of oxen, when you go back further, involve horses. Literally horsepower. You get into blacksmiths, wagon makers, carriage makers, roads. You can go on and on and on and on and on. So you start at one point. Iron? Yeah, you got iron in this area.
The tools and sacrifice, now the small tools, like prior to the Civil War, that's all they did. little concerts that went out in those holes, and the walls were full of, they only made ice tubes. And you sold them up and down Hudson River, because this is a big industry, ice in Hudson River. Hudson was doing this in 30s and 40s. How about Hammertown? That was an Indian, wasn't it?
Yes.
At one point there was a science factory, wasn't it? And they started. And just to blaze, you know? And there was so much noise, and they called it Hammertown.
Well, I was living for a long time, and this is all very, very wonderful. I look at it now, a big paper house with all those bundles of paper, and all the containers, and the hospitals, and costumes, and the folders, and the iron tools, and all of this. This is wonderful. But what concerns me, and I'm sure the gentleman in the school will tell you, is that when you gather all of these wonderful things, these books, information, your responsible homes, we will want to be careful to not just pile on shelves for someone to come and look at. I think we tend to fall into a trap, the general society, and primarily educated here falling into, fragmentation, fragmentation, and relaxed thinking. Somewhere along the line, we get to have someone or some group that can synthesize all this and put it together. History is produced by historians, not by gatherers of shells and fragments of pottery and so on. Someone has to arrange it and organize it. And let us not forget that part of it. I know that we're able to common man with the horse and the oxen and the horse roving and so on, but if we're going to preserve anything or teach anything, it has to be produced as an organized fashion, and that's the synthesis that can be going forward.
No, you can't overlook that.
And let us think of it early.
A mind cannot gather without fingers.
Yes, but let us think of that part of it very early in the game so that we don't get overwhelmed by these little bundles of bones and then don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Well, that's the point I tried to make about the cabinet. That may have been all right for the 1870s, but it's no good now because things lying on shelves, typically in the 1870s with Latin names on them, have no meaning to anybody but the guy who collected them and put them on the shelf.
Very, very true. You've got to get the shelf and then start filling in the...
Yeah. Well, I mentioned exhibits. I said interpretive exhibits.
Historians learned, archaeologists went to Troy and found the greatest treasures in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Well, now, explain that in your life. He was an amateur.
Yes, but...
And he just happened to read Homer and figured out that, well, maybe he's dug here and he found it.
This is wonderful, but...
Certainly was.
Yes, but the
reconstruction
reconstruction of the civilization of Troy was not done by humans, but by the people who assembled it, organized it, interpreted it, synthesized the whole thing. He discovered it. And this is what I'm saying. Exactly. We need the experiments to go out and look and bring in the material, but then we need someone to interpret it and arrange it and reconstruct what was.
Yeah, after you found it.
Well, different people.
No one is denying the importance of finding it.
Right.
Different people for different things.
Exactly.
Isn't that what one of the main purposes of this organization is? Maybe instruct the common man how to do this, but maybe
Yeah.
a little enthusiasm.
Well,
I am the
there are a lot of
point-
common men like myself here, and we need everybody, okay?
Yeah.
And those who can organize the material can organize it. Those who can just go out and those who can make
And this is definitely the next division for it.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to give the impression that the synthesis of material isn't needed. What I'm saying is that a different emphasis is needed. There's been enough. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, but this is true. But what I'm trying to say is that there are other things besides George Washington, for example, in American history. Believe it or not.
It's also a man who made the boat.
Yeah, right. There's also the guy who owned it, whose name was McConkie, and who was an upstate New Yorker, and had a tavern in a place called, what is that? Up above Congress? and he's buried in New York State, William McConkie. And he was the ferryman who ferried George Washington across the Delaware. Well, there probably weren't over 3 people in the world who knew about that, except one of the people in our office, who was also the world's foremost authority on covered bridges, by the way. But whose emphasis is this kind of thing? I mean, he spends his time working on, well, for instance, covered bridges. He's written five books on covered bridges. He is working right now on aerial warfare in the Spanish Civil War. You know, which there is, huh?
All from the Germans.
No, not all from the German side.
That's where they tried out their
Yeah, that's where the Germans, where they built their airport.
Right, I know.
But there isn't any material. There isn't any published material on this. He's working from primary sources completely. He's working on several books and articles on iron mining and manufacturing in New York State. Very little on this kind of thing. He works things like William McConkie, who was the ferryman, who was a New Yorker. And by the way, he's the executive secretary to the New York State American Revolution Bicentennial Commission. His name is Richard Allen. I have these if you'd like to take them tonight. They just explain a little bit about the Bicentennial Commission. But here's a man who, although he believes in the more formal aspects of studying history, also believes that there are other things too, and he's doing a great deal. He's collecting the information. He has over 2,000 photographs of covered bridges, which he collected. Oh no, there are only 1,500 covered bridges left standing in the United States, and he's got pictures of all of them. So he probably took himself. But he has this massive material that he collected for years and years and years. Then he started writing books, and you may have seen some of them. There's covered bridges of the Northeast, covered bridges of the Middle Atlantic states, covered bridges of the South. He divided the country up and did them. And not only just listing the covered bridges, but he researched who built them, how they built them, the construction techniques that were used, everything. And there's not a thing that man doesn't know now about covered bridges.
How they had the pack snow inside them during winter?
Oh, yeah.
To get across?
Okay, and here's a little anecdote about, how they got their name as pissing bridges and things involved with this. Really, he's one of the few people I know in the field of history who is devoting himself to this kind of history. But again, he collects the material and then he puts it together. He's a good historian, but he deals not with, for example, George Washington or the Constitution of the United States, but with covered bridges. And this is what I'm trying to say, is that for local historical societies, I think the emphasis should be on this less formal kind of history, because it's the kind of thing you can deal with easily. But it's the kind of thing that we've got to start saving.
David Thurheimer also stressed the terrific importance of public relations in the historical society. One of the members also brought up the idea that we should get the young people out to the older people with tape recorders and let them talk about some experiences and stories that have been passed down, so that we might have them in our collection. And Mr. Thurheimer also talked about a lot of experiences that other historical societies have
organized our inventory committee, and we had a meeting at Ryan's house, and I've got about 100 of these made, and I forgot to bring them, but
So I feel better now because I didn't think I was offered.
no. This is the tell you what the inventory is. As we talked at the last meeting, one of the primary initial tasks of the society is to get together a lot of information on the buildings and on the families in the town of Washington. In this form, we drew up using examples of other forms from other groups and tailoring it then to our own specific use. And I hope if any of you have any comments on this, please let me know. We tried to be as complete as possible and still be simple so that people can understand them. Now, we want everyone, literally, in the town of Washington, who has a house, a building, any kind, to fill one of these out. Going from the Wheaton house and houses of that era up through 72 split levels. Now, obviously, because the 72 split levels will be valuable historically in years to come, and it would be good to have this information from the start. Now, obviously, our main interest is going to be to start with the oldest ones and work as hard as possible and as quickly as possible to get this information. So we're going to need people who will do them on their own houses and who will start going out to specific houses in the area. Selma O'Brien has consented graciously to be our committee chairwoman for this, and her phone number is in the newsletter. So any of you who want to volunteer, if we haven't volunteered you already, let us know. We'll be having another meeting fairly soon. Another committee which is going to be meeting hopefully this coming week is the Charter Committee. This is going to be hopefully before too long a non-profit organization. This way you can give money to it for covering expenses and things. I'm just walking around the back because I see something I need. And it'll be tax deductible. Also, I hope to get fund money, money from the various foundations to help in our work. And that, if you've read the newsletter, you'll know what that's for. But that won't be for a while. So that requires a fair amount of work, and these gentlemen have given us information, and they know quite a bit. And our chairwoman, Margaret Bettis, knows quite a bit about it. She lives down just outside of Burbank and has been active with the town of Unionville Historical Society, and they are still in the process themselves of getting their charter. So, no, we have our charter. Oh, you do have it. You don't have a nonprofit status. You do. You have everything. Oh, great. So what they've had to do will be very helpful to us. But again, this requires some work, and we'll have to elect officers and be very official, which I hope doesn't discourage anyone. I have a fear of organized organization. We have a lot of other committees we need. Transportation. There are a lot of old people, I'm sure, who would like to come to these meetings, but obviously aren't able to get out and drive, either because they don't have cars or because of the inclement weather. drive, and anyone who would like to be in charge of coordinating drivers would be greatly appreciated. Also, anyone who would like to be in charge of a refreshment committee, that'd be big. We have cookies made by Suzanne Gucci and Sally O'Brien. And there are all sorts of other areas which I'm mentioning here which we need work done on. We'll need more work done on. If you have any specific area you want to help with, please let me know before I volunteer here. Okay, well, let's get started with our speakers, our guests. I shouldn't say speakers, but you do all the talking. Anything you'd like to say in the beginning?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a few general points. Steve and I are really not in the business of public speaking. We act as consultants, advisors, and we try to answer questions and offer suggestions to groups such as yours. And we find it works better than to stand up here and tell you a lot of things that really some of them will go over your head and others you'll forget by the time you get home. And it doesn't do a lot. So what we try to do is to have you develop your own ideas and to advise you along the way. But let me make some points. The commonly understood purpose of an historical society is to collect, preserve, and disseminate historical information. And too often, historical societies concentrate all their efforts on the first of those, collection. And they seem to forget that the preservation and dissemination functions are really the purposes for collecting in the first place. So that a good historical society is not only collecting information, and in this way we're talking about artifacts also, but is working to preserve these, not simply sticking them in an attic somewhere or on shelves, but actively engaged in a program of preservation. And also making the material and the information available to the people of the community which they serve. And when we talk about a community, we don't simply mean, for instance, the town of Washington, but we mean all those people who you might serve. If you have a local museum and you have tourists coming through, then they're part of your community. Your community as a historical society are all of those people who will be served by you. So you have to make these things available to them. Now the other point, you mentioned chartering, and in New York State, historical societies are usually chartered by the Board of Regents as nonprofit educational institutions. Thus, they really have a mandate, both legally and morally, to serve an educational role within the community. And unfortunately, this has been pretty much ignored over the last 50 to 70 years. And we're coming into a period now where all sorts of cultural endeavors, and to a large degree an emphasis on local history, is coming under the scrutiny of various people, including the Board of Regents. And the feeling is that this has become so important to so many people as part of their cultural life that it can no longer be ignored and let these things slide. So now, if an institution is chartered as an educational institution, it has to be an educational institution. It has to serve that function. So I want you to keep this in mind, that when you get your charter, you have this mandate to educate within your community. Now, this doesn't mean that you're competing directly with the schools or that you're engaging in a formal educational program, because education can be a process that's handled in a variety of ways. And quite often the most effective education is an informal type of education, which many historical societies engage in. However, more and more historical societies are becoming involved in formal education. This is something else that's becoming increasingly important to people today. You just have to look around you at the proliferation of adult education courses in local high school systems, for example, and the wide range that these are covering now. It's no longer tax preparation and some of the common things of a few years ago, but the arts and crafts, philosophy, all kinds of things. And historical societies can become engaged in this, and we have worked with groups throughout the state who are working with local high schools, with community colleges, with colleges and universities, developing courses of study, seminars, what one group has called mini history courses, one evening lectures on a historical subject. And these are dealt with in a fairly formal way. Of course, grades aren't generally given, but it's the kind of thing people want to learn about local history. And for a great many people, it's easier to do it in a structured environment, in a classroom with a professor or an instructor of some kind in front, lecturing to them, giving them notes, audio-visual programs, this sort of thing. So historical societies can very easily deal with this kind of thing. One of the most popular ways that historical societies are being involved in educational endeavors is to work with the local school systems. And there are a number of ways this can be done. Interpretive exhibits. This is generally aimed at the society with a museum, but not necessarily so, because exhibits can be done very effectively with graphics and with a minimum of artifacts. But these exhibits can be installed in the schools. Most new schools now have exhibit areas in places where most students pass through. They can be done in conjunction with social studies courses or with humanities courses, this sort of things, to fit in with the curriculum. Loan kits, very similar type of thing, only the materials are packaged and sent to the schools, and the teacher uses them in the classroom. And along with the documents, graphics, artifacts, whatever is in the kit, is a teacher's packet which gives suggestions on how to use these effectively in the classroom to supplement the curriculum. Tours and museum visits. It's not necessary to have your own museum to operate this kind of program. You're within reach of a great many fine museums here, and the Historical Society could take a role of leadership in getting the schools to utilize this kind of facility. Resource people and materials. As an ex-social studies teacher, I know the social studies teachers are always crying for resource people and materials. And here is something that the Historical Society can work on. Whether it's to develop something in the way of a speaker's bureau, but not really that formal. People who can appear before a class or a school group and talk on a subject or discuss a subject. Materials that fit in the social studies curriculum, particularly humanities curriculum also. 7th grade is natural. The Age of Homes Fund, the immigration and the growth of the cities, this sort of thing. There are a great many materials that frequently come to local historical societies and they don't know what to do with them. It's amazing the wealth of material that's tucked away in corners because it isn't a silver tea service or a fine piece of furniture. It's a set of diaries, or it's a few old photographs or something like this. To my way of thinking, this kind of material can be far more valuable as educational material than some of the fine museum objects that people are that many museum and historical agency people are concerned with today. And they tend to neglect these other things. And for a small group just starting, these are the kinds of things you can get your hands on. They're the kinds of things you can work with, and they're the kinds of things I think that are more fun than a silver tea service. Special classes and programs. The variety here is really limited only by your imagination. Crafts and arts classes are obvious things, and very, very popular both with youngsters and with adults. This goes back to what I said about the adult education courses in high schools. I know I've had some connection with these programs, and I kind of keep an eye on them in my own area. And the traditional courses are falling by the wayside. They're being taken over by things like craft courses. Because this is what people are becoming interested in, this kind of thing. They want, I don't know really how to explain it, and I think probably you all know as well as I do about this phenomenon and probably some of the reasons for it. But we live in a very confused, hectic time, and I think most people are looking for some way to return to an easier, or what they think is an easier, calmer age. And the interest in local history, for example, is part of this. They really can't transport themselves back into time to live in another era, but they can, with their leisure time, which increases every day for all of us. We get more and more leisure time, yet we live at a faster and faster pace. But they start using the leisure time to try to, maybe to slow down. I really don't know. But local history, arts and crafts, and things of this nature are becoming more and more important to a great many people. And it's not just youngsters, but young adults, middle-aged people, and the elderly. So that here's an area where an historical society can really do something worthwhile. Independent study programs are another area where historical societies can work with the schools. This is something that's becoming more and more common in high schools, where students choose, or are given, generally they choose, a specific area of study or a topic, and then go out and do all of the work involved in this. They research the topic, and they develop some kind of project or write a paper or something of this nature. And with just the barest minimum of supervision from a teacher. But it requires resources. And I think that local history independent study programs would be a good thing to get involved in. And one of the big problems with independent study programs is that the youngsters cannot find people who will work with them in the community. This is only true in high school, but it's also true in college level, because in Albany we have Urban Studies Center, and there was an article in the paper the other day. They work primarily on the independent study system, and a great many of the students there are having a lot of difficulty finding people who will work with them in the community, and then people don't want to talk to them, or they don't have the time to talk to them, or they're not interested in talking to them, and it's very hard for them to get the kinds of information that they need to develop their projects. So a group like this can organize this kind of of programs so that the youngsters will know who they can talk to and the people will be made available. The purpose of all this, as I said before, is to supplement and enhance the typical formal classroom program. And many of these things, again, lend themselves to other areas of your community, adult education. The many lectures that I mentioned I became involved with became a very, very popular adult education program because it was the kind of thing that didn't require attendance every Wednesday night or 2 nights a week or this sort of thing. It was 6 or 8 or 10 lectures scheduled, 1 a week during the adult education semester, each one dealing with a specific subject and having a different visiting lecturer come in. Most of them were illustrated with slides or films. And people really, really enjoyed this. If they didn't particularly feel interested in a certain topic, they didn't have to go that way. So this is the kind of thing that your group could work with. But as I say, I'm not telling you to do these things. I'm just giving you some ideas. But again, it's limited only by your imaginations. You can go almost anywhere. And I think that the concept of the traditional historical society, where a few people all over the age of 45 sit around and listen to some, let's say, learned gentleman discourse for 2.5 hours on some very dry and dusty topic. That day is gone. That historical society is, if not already dead, is dying. And we see it every day. A great many historical societies are in trouble. Not only financially, because they can't get money anymore, but simply because they don't have any people. You know, all of these people who used to come to the meetings are dead. And nobody else is interested. Youngsters aren't interested. So that you have to get young people interested. You have to get middle-aged people. You have to get elderly people interested. Everybody has to, and you want people from all economic areas in your community. You want people with all kinds of personal interests, not just the people who are interested in genealogy, not just the people who are interested in archaeology, but people who are interested in any facet of local history. And I sometimes get very discouraged with the term local history because I think that it imposes a limit on us that isn't there. Because if you look at history, you actually look at history, it's the record of people's lives so that it encompasses everything that those people did. So I defy you to think of an area that local history can't deal with. And it's impossible because local history can deal with absolutely everything that anybody ever did or said or thought, if you want to really get carried away. So that don't limit yourselves. Don't limit yourselves geographically, except that you have to define an area you're dealing with, like the town of Washington. But don't limit your members geographically. You want members from outside of your town. Your community should extend beyond political boundaries. Don't limit yourself to some tight little area like genealogy. Genealogy is important, but so are a great many other things. Archaeology is important. Architectural studies are important. And I really got very enthused when I heard you mention about listing 1972 split-level houses, because I've been saying this for years and everybody laughs at me. But the way they build houses nowadays, in 100 years, there's only going to be one 1972 split-level house left. You know, and it'll be a tremendous historical asset. So that it isn't foolish to do these kinds of things. It isn't foolish to collect any contemporary material. And some historical agencies are working on this kind of thing right now, primarily in conjunction with programs for children, filmmaking, for instance, keeping film records of activities or slides, developing slide files of local, everyday life, for that matter, but also the important things that happen in the community.
The things we look at now, as valuable, diaries and whatnot, if it's 100 years old, we say, gosh, look at this diary, look at how the funny way these people lived, and we have pictures of 1920 dresses.
Well, just think of the people 100 years from now. Are they going to have anything from 1972 or 1973? Well, they're not going to have very much, because we're certainly a throwaway culture. And today, it isn't just a matter of throwing it over the bank, because we're all concerned about polluting the environment. So it's destroyed somehow. Landfill operations, incineration, chemical destruction processes. Things just come on the scene and disappear so rapidly these days that really it's important that somebody try to conserve these things for future generations, as things were not so much consciously conserved, although a great many were 100 years ago. But I think that things were made a lot better 100 years ago so that they lasted longer. I'm convinced of that. But we do owe a debt of gratitude to the people who, in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, developed the personal cabinet type of museum, of which there are far too many today. Because things were put in almost a state of suspended animation, or put in a state of limbo, I guess. And nothing much happened to them over the years, so they're still around. The only problem is they're still in 1870 museums. And this is the 1970s. So that you also have to grow with the time. Now I really don't know what else I can tell you, except that from what I've seen here, you're off to a darn good start. Because most groups, and this is your second meeting? Yeah, most groups usually spend the first 6 or 8 meetings arguing over what their constitution bylaws are going to say. When, from our office, we give you a sample, I've got one here somewhere, but we've got a sample that practically everybody ends up copying verbatim anyway. So why bother? But here you've started with an architect, or the survey, and you mentioned the bicycle tour thing, which is really a pretty new idea. I don't think I've run across that.
Let me mention what that is for those of you who might not know. Well, we want to make a bicycle touring guide of the town of Washington. This will be a book or something, probably softcover, that will have maps of the town of Washington, descriptions of the road conditions, and also all sorts of information on historical points of interest, geographic, geological, scenic points of interest, culinary points of interest. It's the whole, all sorts of aspects of the community, and hopefully it will be done primarily by various high school students. Jonathan Wexler, who was here at the last meeting, local high school teacher, been appointed to some position.
Recreation Commissioner.
Recreation Commissioner up in Hyde Park. Rhinebeck, he couldn't come tonight. But he's been doing work on local history at the high school, and he and some of his classes, and Nancy Davis, another teacher, are going to be working on it. And I talked to people at Millbrook School for both, and they're interested in the idea. And I've even talked to the kids at my school who are fairly young, and the interest,